Welcome to another edition of Time for Forgiveness, the show that not only teaches you how to forgive, but also gives you compelling guests who share their stories on how they found the path to forgiveness. Now, please welcome your hosts. Here are Kelly and Bob Pascuzzi.
Welcome back. I'm Bob Pascuzzi for Kelly Pascuzzi and Sean Parr. We're excited to have you in for another compelling episode of Time for Forgiveness. Today, we have our very special friends and guests, Jeff and Sally Bloskey. You guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And we're here today to talk about a gut-wrenching, just a heart-wrenching story of their son, Matthew, who lost his life 5 years ago in a road rage crash that took his life. And you guys, thinking back to that day, I just think to put some context around what happened specifically that day, which will then propel us into your story and your navigation of losing Matthew, and just also who Matthew was. But I think it's important to put that context around that day and what transpired.
Sure.
So, Jeff, there is a pair of drivers driving down 151st in Overland Park, Kansas,
Correct.
in excess of 100 miles an hour.
Correct.
Your son is coming the opposite direction. He's about to turn into your subdivision. He's only blocks from your home.
Correct.
And then something happened.
Right.
Can you pick it up from there, please?
Sure. As you mentioned, there were two vehicles going the opposite direction. They made contact with each other. One of the vehicles went out of control, crossed the median, and struck our son's vehicle. He was pronounced dead at the scene, and this was about 2 blocks away from our house. It was a Saturday afternoon. He had just been with friends getting ready for a high school dance that evening, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was at the golf course. I looked at my phone. There was a number I didn't recognize, which normally I don't answer. Something told me I needed to answer it. And it was a police officer asking me to come to the intersection near our home, and that someone had been in an accident. And I asked who, and was told that it was our son, Matthew. That's how we lost Matthew. It was October 6, 2018. About 5.5 years ago.
Well, I know how difficult it is to talk about this, and I want to thank you guys for coming in today and sharing your heart.
Absolutely.
And our hope is that, our knowing is that your story is going to inspire so many people, because there's so many elements of who Matthew was as a person. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that if you would like.
Sure.
What made Kelly and I knew Matthew. Obviously, he was good friends with our son, RJ, and we love Matthew. And there were so many special elements of who he was as a person. I'd love for you guys to give our audience a little insight to what made Matthew so special as a person, as a friend, as a son, his how he carried himself, and the love that he shared with the people he came in contact with, because I think everybody that knew Matthew loved Matthew. But I'll let you speak about that, Sally.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say, I think to know Matthew was just to love Matthew. He just was a very special light in this world. I think that's the best way to say it. He just interacted with people in a very joyful, enthusiastic, energetic, loving, kind way. I think we've talked about this before with you all, that he just left everybody feeling elevated, feeling good. I think any interaction that anybody ever had with Matthew was positive. He had a sense of humor like no other, really. I mean, and he has had that sense of humor since he was itty bitty. My brother, in fact, I remember when Matthew was young, he's like, this is just unbelievable. This kid understands humor in a way that he shouldn't. He's just too young to be grasping these comedic ideas. And his timing and his laugh was, I miss his laugh so desperately. It filled a room.
Yeah, it did. Matthew had an old soul, for sure.
Yes.
He was more mature than his years.
Not just in comedy.
Not just not just in comedy, but in his approach to life, in his approach to how he carried himself. For some people, myself included, it takes a lot of years to be comfortable in your own skin and not worry about what people think about you. And
Matthew
and
did
Matthew,
not care.
yeah, from birth. I mean, from very early on, he was always just extremely comfortable being himself. When you say he didn't worry about what other people thought, I mean, he did, right? I mean, we all do to some degree, but Matthew would not hesitate to be silly, to dress in a costume, where some kids his age might say, oh, I don't know what people are going to think.
Right.
Matthew thought, okay, yeah, why not?
Give it a try.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to quantify a statement like, somebody has an old soul, but that really is a good way to describe Matthew.
But aside from, being silly and dressing up and all the fun that Matthew loved to have, that not caring what other people think went beyond that in more serious ways. I mean, he was just very authentic in his friendships and didn't follow just because the crowd was saying this or doing this. He did what he needed to do based on his knowing of right and wrong and moral compass and guiding a friend through something. I mean, because we did hear countless stories about Matthew being there for individuals that we had no idea, that he had these interactions with certain individuals and life-changing.
Yeah, I remember that there was one female friend in particular who wrote us a letter and said that
he saved her life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because she was feeling so depressed and down about her life and
yeah. And I've told this story before, and I know you all know it, but even, his teachers.
yes.
Matthew
him.
was respectful, but he wouldn't hesitate to engage in fun with his teachers.
Right.
Come up with silly names for teachers.
He always knew the line.
Right.
He didn't cross the line.
No, he straddled it.
Yeah, totally.
But he didn't cross it.
That's
Totally.
probably what they loved about him, though, too.
Exactly, yeah.
Because his true self, his true authentic,
He wasn't afraid to show it.
Right.
Yeah,
joyful,
that's really,
silly, happy
there's
self.
something uniquely refreshing about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially in a teenager, right?
Well, Bob had mentioned, obviously, that our son and Matthew were inseparable. And it was such a struggle for our son navigating life afterwards because he had commented multiple times how Matthew just helped him understand that not to take life so serious. But obviously, life turned pretty serious for you guys after that day. Especially the driver did not stop and left the scene of the accident.
Right.
And I would just like to open it up to what that looked like after.
Well, the first few days after the crash, we met with and heard from the Overland Park Police Department a lot, updating us on the investigation. There wasn't. They struggled with giving us or being able to give us very specific information, other than to say that there was another driver. Then it was they were tracking down leads. Then they located him. He was arrested, charged, ultimately charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. He eventually, after unfortunately, the legal proceedings to a degree coincided with COVID. A lot of court shutdowns, a lot of slowdowns. It drug out for 3 years. He eventually pled guilty and was sentenced. And we went to the sentencing hearing and spoke to the court, as did I can't even remember how many of our friends were there. I mean, it was in the hundreds.
Friends and family. And people in the community.
Right. And so he was ultimately sentenced. He did appeal just within the last 3 weeks or so. The Kansas Supreme Court rejected his final appeal. So he is serving out his sentence.
Well, it's a crash, but everyone experiences the crash very differently. And in regards to your grief, your loss, I'm sure the journey was very different for both of you.
Very, very.
Would you like to share a bit about that?
Well, it's hard to summarize, but in the beginning, I just did not understand where this grief was going to take me physically, because to experience something so traumatic like that, your brain it felt like a nervous breakdown. It was a nervous breakdown, not that it felt like one. It was a nervous breakdown. But by January, I could not even function. I was taken to the emergency room and ultimately hospitalized. So in the beginning, Jeff didn't even have time to grieve, nor did most of my family members, because they were so concerned about my well-being. So Jeff had to really push aside his grieving, I want to say, for a full year.
That's probably accurate. Yeah, I mean, for whatever reason, whether it's genetic or whatever the reasoning is, I went into protection mode. And, saw my primary purpose at that point in time was to protect Sally and our kids. So, that probably delayed the grief that I was experiencing probably pushed it below the surface to a degree, and whereas Sally's was more immediate, mine was delayed.
But with that being said, too, I think when I started to physically feel better and on medication and going to therapy and doing yoga and trying to eat right and, all the things that help you in your path to healing, you do hear about this, and it's so true that not just men and women grieve differently. I mean, our children grieve differently than we did.
Right.
But Jeff and I certainly did have different ways of grieving, and it wasn't always easy. It wasn't always hard to accept. I would get angry sometimes with him because I would be feeling so intensely about something and emotional, and his response wasn't always what I wanted it to be. And I think, I don't want to speak for you, but in your mind, he was just probably listening and letting me have my feelings, but I wanted him to feel with me. I wanted him to be in sync with me, and it didn't always look like that.
Right.
And it created a lot of, I don't even know the right
Stress?
word. Stress.
Stress, I would say.
A little bit of I hate to use the word anger, but such frustration.
Tension, I would
yes,
say.
tension,
Yeah,
frustration.
Yeah.
And you're not only managing your own personal grief, you are managing your spouse's grief. You're managing our other children's grief. It's so complex.
Grandparents' grief.
There's so many layers to grief, and the people that are in that grieving family with you.
Right.
I know you were in protection mode, as you had said, but was there ever, maybe looking back now, an awareness or a knowing that maybe it was just conditioned in you, that maybe in most males that you stay strong, you don't break, you don't show emotion? Did that have an impact on your grief?
For sure. It did at times. And that was part of protection mode, was I was trying to be stable and allow Sally and others in the family to grieve the way they needed to grieve, and to try to add some stability around
Right.
that.
Mm-hmm.
I would, when I was alone, sitting in my car at the office, I would scream and cry and do the things that I felt like I couldn't do around Sally. I couldn't do around our children.
And maybe around your friends.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you guys again, because I know this is not easy to do, and sharing your heart, and this helps other people, because when we experience, I think there's trauma, then there's big trauma, and this is even bigger, losing a son. And I understand, Jeff, that you wanted to be the rock for the family,
Right.
and I think I would have felt the same way. I don't know how I would have handled that. In terms of how you guys processed it individually, but then together as a couple, was there something because you see how you see other stories like this where something of this magnitude might take place and the husband and wife can split apart.
Sure.
Do you guys feel like, what was that element, if you will, or something that you felt like kept you together? How would you let our audience know how you navigated that together and came out the other end?
Well, it's been a rocky road. I'm not going to lie. And it's not something that we've shared with a lot of people, not even you all, because it's been such a journey. And I remember, having conversations with Jeff and wondering if we were going to be one of those couples. But also feeling like when you're in so deep with something like this, I remember saying to you on numerous occasions, we just need to give it time and space. And not only the marriage, but just individually with each other's grieving process.
Right.
And
Yeah, I think the understanding that we were both grieving differently, and that we were never going to be matched up, right?
Yeah.
And allowing each other the space to do that, I think was huge.
and we just so happened to see the same therapist,
Right.
which some people might see that as a negative, but I see it as a positive because she and our daughter actually goes to her as well. And I do think it's a benefit because she gets to see the whole family dynamic, kind of the whole picture, and maybe where we're each coming from. And in her professional expertise, deal with certain issues maybe more effectively that way.
And on that point, we actually started going to her together
Correct.
after
Well,
Sally was hospitalized.
That's
and
because
then-
I could not get myself to and from anywhere.
But-
and
but
so
we've
Jeff did set in, yes.
Right. We've continued to see her individually since that time. But I think those initial sessions together, I think, were helpful, certainly to me. I think on some level probably helpful to you as well.
In the ravine, there's a line that says, life can change in an instant, and it certainly did for you guys in a big way.
Yeah.
Something, obviously, you can never see anything like this coming, and you don't know how you're going to deal with it. But looking back on it now, 5 years later, what would you guys share with the audience in terms of what you've learned about processing? I guess one topic would be grief, right? Like, how do you look at that topic now? Like, Sally, you've had to process this at such a deep level. What have you learned from it?
Oh my gosh. I think that the main thing I've learned from experiencing this type of grief is that you are forever changed. And don't have an expectation of yourself to ever be that person again, because it's in my mind it's impossible.
Yeah.
And to give yourself that grace moving forward in your grief. I guess, I didn't think about my grief consciously, especially in the beginning. I think I do more now. But I've never understood how people, including my husband, I do understand it to some extent with Jeff, but you do hear about people burying their grief and not dealing with it and not processing their grief. And I've never been able to relate to that because for me, it just happened. I didn't have a choice. That's earlier when I said I didn't understand where my grief was going to take me. And
For me, the couple of things that I've learned, and one of which we've touched upon already, is that everybody experiences it differently. There's no cookie cutter form of experiencing grief. I know that there's books that have been written that say, oh, there are these stages, and 1 through 5 or 1 through 7 or whatever it is. And, once you get to stage 7 and you come out the other side, boy, you're done. No,
On 6, here's where you should
exactly,
be, right?
yeah. That's baloney. There are no two identical ways that people experience grief. The other thing that I've learned is, and the two of you are touching upon this in your project, our society does not understand how to handle grief, how to interact with people who are experiencing grief, and we just don't understand grief at all until you go through it.
Well, that's going to go to my next question here, is because
I'm glad I could offer that lead-in.
I want to go back to what Sally said. Like, she can't understand someone that buries their grief because she didn't have a choice.
Right.
And I guess most people would think I didn't have a choice as well, because my event was quite tragic as well. But I guess I did make a choice to bury it because I felt responsible to make others comfortable around me, which is so ridiculous now that I'm saying this. So I would love for both of you to maybe comment on, to the audience, like Jeff said, how can you support someone that is grieving? What would that look like for both of you? And I know it's going to be an individual answer for each.
Well, I want to go back to where I lost my train of thought,
Sure.
because it goes back to that, is that what I've learned about grief is that whatever you are feeling, whatever emotion that is, you need to allow yourself to feel it. And again, I never thought about it. I just did it. I felt whatever was coming my way. And I just think that that's important for people to understand, is to not push that down. Think that something's wrong with you. Pushing it down for the sake of other people. You need to go through everything that bubbles up inside of you. That's what I have learned through my experience, and I feel that I have come out on the other side. I mean, there's really no other side. You live with it every day of your life until you are no longer here. But I feel like I can move through life much differently because I did feel my grief at every level.
Well, I want to say I was with you some of those times that you did feel and you did show it, and it was uncomfortable and it was raw and real, but it was the greatest teacher and it was the greatest gift for me because it gave me a new perspective about my own grief. And now, looking back, I really believe I'm not afraid to have that supposed hard conversation anymore because of that example. So thank you. And I'd love for Jeff to answer as well.
So answering your last question, because I think Sally backtracked a little bit.
I did.
It was interesting. I was recently on a fishing trip, and I was in the car with a buddy of mine for 14 hours. And this topic came up. And he candidly said, what is the right thing to do or to say? And I said, the wrong thing is ignoring it, right? Ignoring the loss. The right thing, there's no standard, but it's so easy to simply acknowledge the loss, say I'm sorry, say I'm thinking of you, I'm here for you. What more, as somebody experiencing grief, the power of those words is huge.
And even all these years later, right? Like, how are you doing now?
Right.
Correct.
Right.
when people check in, that's nice to hear, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and not just in those, weeks, months, even a year after, because you are still feeling that loss like it happened yesterday.
Yeah, and it's never going to go away, obviously. No. And I think there's two sides to the coin. One is, I think back to some of the losses I've had, like, a certain amount of time has transpired. I'm over this. And you can even kind of fake yourself out, I think, with that.
Sure.
You're actually not over with it because it bubbles up, and you never know when it's going to happen, right? And it just comes on. Mm-hmm. But then also, when you look at your friends and family and colleagues and things like that, I think there is, to a certain degree, this idea that, a certain amount of time has transpired, they should be over it by now, or they're not thinking about it, or they've kind of moved on, if you will. Do you guys... do you think that's kind of a true statement?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I think it's also true, and we've heard this from people who, when we have a candid discussion with them about, approaching us or other people with grief, and we get the response, well, I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to upset you. Well, my response is, you cannot there's nothing you can do that could upset me more than I've been upset. Yeah. And they've never thought of it in those terms, right? I mean, they go, oh, yeah, I guess that's true. I'm going to get teary. I'm going to get emotional. I'll do that till the day I die.
Sure.
But that's okay. They need to know it's not what they've said that's upset me.
It's the love.
It is the love that they're showing and the support that they're showing, combined with that grief that causes that emotion. And it's part grief and it's part joy, because it's nice to know that you're supported and that people are thinking about you.
Well, can I interject just real quick? And that's the thing, is that we all know that grief is love, right? And so you're never going to stop loving. We're never going to stop loving Matthew just because he's not here in the physical world. And that's what we're emotional about, is because we will, he's not here. And we do have to grieve him. But grief is love. And I want to share this little quote that I just think is so, will resonate with what we're talking about. It says, people rush to get rid of grief because they see it as hanging on to loss. But grief is really hanging on to love, which is why you always feel it.
Yeah, the greater your grief, the greater the love, the depth of the love. Right? Yeah.
Correct.
Well, speaking of the love, I think that's where, after my tragedy, I didn't do it the next day, and it took years, but I had to find purpose or good in that tragedy. And what I found was the purpose was what I did next. And I would love for both of you to talk about what that looks like for each of you.
Well, my dear friend Kelly, as you know, we are embarking on a project to make a documentary on grief. Not only from our experience of losing Matthew, but your experience of losing a friend at a young age. And that desire has come from both of our experiences, and an understanding that, what Jeff touched on earlier, that our society just does not do a good job of talking about grief. There's an uncomfortableness around the subject matter, and our goal is to make grief more comfortable. Just plain and simple, just more comfortable to be able to talk about and to understand that if you have somebody in your life that is grieving, let them grieve in front of you. Let them talk. Let them share, because that is part of the whole process. That is what helps them heal. And, people always say, I wish there was something I could do. I wish there was something I could do. Well, that is something that you can do, is sit and listen.
Listen. I love that. Jeff?
Well, obviously supporting you and Sally in your project is very important to me. I haven't necessarily taken my grief and turned it into a purpose or a project like you all have.
Yes,
However,
you have.
I was going to finish.
However,
Yes, you have.
I have allowed myself to express my grief through some songwriting. And so that has been helpful in the healing process. I mean, it never ends, right?
Sure.
But that has been helpful to me. Otherwise, just supporting you all on your project. So.
What's inspiring to me, you guys, is so we've worked on a workbook that helps people navigate through the process of forgiveness, how to get started and move through it. But the last pillar, there's 4 pillars, but the last pillar is turning pain into purpose. And I think that's what you're doing right now. So that's so awesome that you're finding a way to bring good out of this, which I'm sure, even maybe a year or two ago, you probably said, I don't know what good could come out of it. But here you are now, and you're doing it, you're finding it, and it's always there if we look for it. So if you're just joining us, we're speaking to Jeff and Sally Bloskey, and they're discussing the tragic loss of their beloved son Matthew in a senseless road rage crash that took his life. And guys, before we wrap up, I do obviously the podcast is the topic is forgiveness, and so I wanted to kind of go there to some degree, and see what your thoughts were around that topic. Obviously, you've got somebody here that did something so senseless. He's paying the price. He's behind bars for a long time. How do you look at forgiveness at this point in time? And I think Kelly and I have talked about it's changed over the years for us in terms of what we experience. But where you are right now in your journey through this, how do you look at forgiveness, and how are you digesting that or processing that?
And it is interesting because until really discussing doing this podcast with you, I don't really think about forgiveness in relationship to the man who took Matthew's life. I don't give it a whole lot of thought, but I will share that mine. The idea of forgiveness has changed through the years because, obviously the raw emotion of what happened and my feelings towards this man, I would fantasize about being in my car and taking his life. And I would have that fantasy, quite a bit. And then that stopped because I was in a place where I needed to work on myself. And then after getting myself physically better, really my focus has always been on Matthew and my love for Matthew. And so somebody did ask me about forgiveness a couple years ago who heard me say, I want to, take his life and run him down. And And I know she was struck by that, was sort of shocked by that initially, but understood it. But then she asked me about my feelings years later. And I told her, I said, I just don't even think about him. I don't know his name. I don't give him any time and energy.
But can I say something then? So what's resonating with me is when you had said, I just made a decision because I had to work on me. And I truly believe forgiveness is about me. It's about you. It's about a gift we give ourselves.
Correct.
And then you further went into that all you have is love for Matthew. But if we hold on to the other thing, that is in some way competing for that space of full love for your son.
Correct.
And so I think that's a beautiful example of what moving towards or your approach or whatever you want to say forgiveness in your life looks like.
And exactly, but I just never thought about it on a conscious level. It's just what I did naturally, is knowing that I needed to care for myself and take certain steps to help heal. And it's a process. I'm still not, there, and I won't be until I'm no longer here. But it's never been a conscious thought process. I need to do this. I need to do that. It's just, and again, I think that's because my love is so much more powerful than anything that I would have towards this gentleman.
But something you just said is very important because it's the act of doing. It's something you said, I'll do until I leave this earth. And forgiveness isn't something we're just talking about. It's something that we actually have to do. And sometimes it's something we're working on, for quite a while.
I will never forget, what he took from us, that he took Matthew's life from us and the aftermath that created. And I still am not able to say those words that I forgive him for doing that. I just know that this is the space that I live in. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's good enough for now.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I have probably more than you have had conscious thoughts, questions about the specific forgiveness of the individual, and I've struggled with it. I continue to struggle with it from a spiritual and religious standpoint. I know God teaches us to forgive. And I've had conversations with God about my inability to do that. Now, I will say that in the aftermath of losing Matthew, it has been much easier for me to forgive other things, other people, for things that for years I wasn't able to do, that don't have to do with losing Matthew. And I suppose the loss of Matthew and the struggle with forgiveness related to his loss has sort of opened my heart and my eyes to saying, to recognizing how easy it is to forgive people for other things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But as far as forgiveness related to the loss of Matthew, I struggle with that constantly. And I'm not sure I'll ever be there.
And I think you should. I mean, I just think that's, what went through my head is, as you should.
It's understandable. I mean,
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. and you're processing this differently, obviously, than Sally,
Sure.
and vice versa. Do you feel like, but you said that you're processing this. I know you want to talk about, you were at a space with the loss of your friend where you felt like it wasn't possible either.
That wasn't even a consideration.
Sure.
And I had, similar thoughts of why someone wouldn't just take their own life versus taking hers. And then I had really kind of same conversations, and I understood I was not able to do that in my own power. But as we were writing the book, I was asked to write a letter to him. And I was like, well, I've already forgiven him. And I was asked to still write the letter. And when the pen hit the paper, I mean, the outburst of emotion, I was aware of I had not really moved into that space. But I may not explain this very clearly, but it really wasn't until filming. And it was kind of this out-of-body experience watching this. And I can't explain it, but I had, for the first time ever, such a sense of compassion for how this person got to that space that I was able to let it go. And again, it was for me that I had come to realize, it was a gift that I gave myself, but it wasn't the day after, it wasn't a year after.
Sure.
It was a process.
Yeah.
It certainly was a process for me.
Yeah, 'cause
And not to diminish, because Jeff, like in our situation, Danny and the story of the ravine, a totally different scenario, obviously, than somebody that just was deciding to, hey, I'm going to come off this red light and go 100 miles an hour, and
Right.
at that moment make a very bad decision
Yeah.
that ended up costing your son his life. But at the same time, we end up at the same spot.
100%. Yeah.
And so I think your point is that you were able with time to get to that place.
And I guess, sorry, I'm speaking, and he was really talking to you, but because you always hear people say that you need to forgive not for the other person but for yourself, which I do agree with, and that by holding on and harboring all of these negative thoughts and emotions that you're poisoning yourself, your physical body, your mental state, your all of it, spiritual well-being. And I agree with that, but I've never been in that space with this person other than the very, very beginning of wanting to take his own life. I have not held that throughout these 5.5 years. So I don't know the answer. Is that forgiveness?
Well, I think there's a difference between, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think, at least in my mind, there's a difference between forgiveness and negative obsession, right? And I certainly don't carry around negative thoughts associated with this man, and frankly, I don't think about him much.
Right. That's why I'm bringing this up,
Yeah,
because you hear experts talk about it in that vein, and so
Yeah.
I'm questioning what is
Right.
it then?
So,
because
I
we
think,
don't do that.
Right. And I think about the positives of Matthew and his life daily, hourly, but I don't carry with me that negative energy, if you will, of spending conscious thought on that man. Now, that may be a form of forgiveness. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
But when I think of forgiveness, I guess I think, there is a a conscious intent, conscious moment where you say, whether it's internally or externally,
Like, I let this go.
I'm
No, it's
letting
very
We
intentional.
call
Yeah.
it like declaring forgiveness.
Sure. Okay.
Very intentional.
Yeah, a declaration, whether it's
Right.
internal or external, of, okay, I forgive you, or I forgive this person.
Okay,
That's what I don't know that I'll ever get to, right?
Correct.
But not to be confused with carrying that negative burden all the time of thinking about him and thinking about what he did. I think about the loss of Matthew, and I think about my love for Matthew and what Matthew was and is, but I don't carry that negative.
But I'm glad you said that, because, I think there's so many people that are listening in this audience that are in a space possibly in their own life that are like, I'll never do it. I can never get there. And I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking for myself. Years ago, I would have said that myself, and here we're sitting on a podcast talking
Right.
about forgiveness. But one of the things when I talk about a gift for myself, it was also, I guess, a gift for her, because before I made that conscious awareness or decision, like, I always went to the trauma, me personally, and that's how she was defined. And when I made the declaration, was able to let go of it, like it changed for me, and then it went to the purpose of what I do next. So,
And I guess that's so maybe on some level I have forgiven, because I
think you
I
have.
don't define my memory and thoughts of Matthew by the trauma.
Nor do I.
It's the good stuff.
But you're also not sending out negative emotions towards this individual.
100%.
Right. And so
Yeah.
that's why I brought that up, because, so many people define it that way, that
Right.
you're holding on, you're
Right.
doing all this, you're having all this negativity, which is poisoning yourself. I've just never done that. And so is that forgiveness? I don't know. But
I
Well,
believe it is.
I
I-
believe that it is. I'm just
I took a
throwing it out
seminar.
there.
I took a seminar not too long ago that taught me to not focus on negative energy and the negatives in life, and to focus on the positives, and that was a great help to me.
yes.
Can I say something before Sally? And before we wrap, what just came to me is your next song has to be called "The Good Stuff."
Ah, there you go.
I think that title has already been used.
Well, reuse it.
The good stuff, part two.
I'm trying to think of who sang that. But
Kenny Chesney.
Kenny
Yeah.
Chesney. Yeah, that's right.
I was just going to say that, too, is that I know, and I know Jeff knows, that Matthew wouldn't want that for us either, right?
Yes.
Matthew would want us to be able to have joy in our life and to live fully.
And to not focus on that negative.
On the negativity,
Yeah.
because that was not who he was. And I, every day
Yeah.
I talk to him and say, I will try to be the light that you were and still are.
Well, that word joy, especially coming through grief, it's like you have to give yourself permission to feel it again.
You do. You do.
And Matthew was somebody that made everybody feel better just in coming in contact with him. He had a sense of humor beyond imagination. He had an infectious laugh. He was an old soul, and he was very comfortable in his own skin. These are all qualities that we can all aspire to and be motivated to achieve someday. So again, we've been the benefactors of having Jeff and Sally Bloskey on our show here at Time for Forgiveness. And again, Jeff and Sally, thank you so much for just being vulnerable, first of all, and sharing your heart.
Absolutely.
I know your story is going to help so many people, and you're just getting started. This is, as you talked about, Sally, the golf tournament that's coming up in July. Check that out. It's at Loch Lloyd on what date?
July 8th.
July 8th. What website can people go to find out more information and sign up to be a golf recipient?
Well,
I guess I
Kelly-
didn't say that right,
Yes.
but to play golf. that
Yes. Well, Kelly and I are partnering with a local film production company called Just Like You Films. So you can go to their website and under events, you will see our Matthew Bloskey Memorial Golf Tournament being held at Loch Lloyd on July 8th. And we would love any and all golfers to come join us and participate or donate to our project in making this documentary on grief a subject matter.
So the proceeds from the golf tournament go directly to the production of the grief documentary.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Fantastic. So please support Sally and Kelly in this first inaugural Matthew Bloskey golf tournament. I'm going to be there. Jeff obviously is going to be there. Everybody's going to be there. Good golfers, Jeff. Bad golfers, me.
I'm not sure I would go into that
anybody
category.
can be there. We
all
take all
are
hackers.
welcome.
Yes.
Men, women. Yes, all
All right.
all are welcome.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, you
so
guys,
much.
thanks so much again. And for myself and for Kelly and Sean Parr, we'll see you next time on another compelling episode of Time for Forgiveness.
Thank you so much for listening and for watching Time for Forgiveness. Hey, listen, visit our website at timeforforgiveness.org. And here's the great news. You can now download our workbook. Just click on the QR code. It's that simple. You can also message us on our website because we read every single message, and we certainly love to help. You can also reach us on our socials on Instagram and Facebook, and you can email us, again, at info@timeforforgiveness.org. I'm Sean Parr for Bob and Kelly Pascuzzi. We'll see you next time on Time for Forgiveness.